Have you ever stopped to wonder what it truly means to age with peace and purpose? When loneliness, loss, and the flow of time become reality, what will we do? This video isn't just about aging. It's a powerful story about embracing the final years of life. Henry, once a shipbuilding engineer in Milwaukee, has tasted both the happiness and sorrow of growing old. From losing Eleanor, the wife he cherished, to the emptiness he felt as his children, Michael and Clara, grew busy with their own lives in Minneapolis and Madison. His journey is deeply personal, yet it evokes profound empathy in those facing similar highs and lows. The house, once filled with life, now echoes only with the wind rustling through the pine trees. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. Henry Larson often sat by the window of his wooden house in Eagle River, Wisconsin, gazing at the slow-moving river and letting his mind drift back to days gone by. He met Eleanor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where he studied engineering, while she immersed herself in literary pages. It was the fall of 1978, when golden leaves blanketed the campus, and Eleanor's gentle gaze made Henry's heart skip a beat. They quickly became inseparable, building a warm family together in Milwaukee, where Henry worked at the shipyard along Lake Michigan. Back then, Henry's life was full of light. He recalled weekend mornings with Eleanor, when she brewed coffee in their small kitchen, its aroma mingling with the laughter of their two children, Michael and Clara. Once, the whole family drove to Peninsula Park, camping by the lake, listening to the waves and stargazing. Henry still vividly remembered the day he taught Michael to fish on Lake Superior. The boy clumsily dropped the rod into the water, making Eleanor burst into laughter. Those moments were like precious gems, sparkling in his memory. Work at the shipyard wasn't easy, but Eleanor was his rock. She'd sit by him on late nights, as he reviewed blueprints, quietly placing a cup of hot tea by his side, and sharing stories she'd read. They dreamed of retirement, imagining walking together along Lake Superior, savoring peace after years of hard work. But that dream never came true. Eleanor began to weaken from a cruel heart condition, and Henry could only watch helplessly, as life slipped away from the woman he loved most. Eleanor's final years were a long, painful stretch. Henry took her to the hospital, in Green Bay, holding her hand through sleepless nights, hoping for a miracle. But no miracle came. One frigid winter afternoon, Eleanor left forever, leaving Henry with an unfillable void. He remembered her last smile, faint but tender, as if saying everything would be okay. When he laid her to rest, Henry stood silently by her grave, the cold wind blurring the tears on his face. Now, sitting in the wooden house in Eagle River, Henry keenly felt the emptiness Eleanor left behind. Michael was now a software engineer in Minneapolis, while Clara taught in Madison. They'd grown up and drifted away, taking with them the laughter that once filled the home. Eleanor's armchair remained there, covered in a thin layer of dust, a silent witness to the past. Henry didn't blame his kids, but he couldn't deny the growing loneliness within him. Those beautiful memories were now both a comfort and a pain, reminding him that everything had changed forever. After Eleanor's death, Henry Larson's wooden house in Eagle River, Wisconsin, became a space shrouded in darkness. Her heart condition had taken the wife he loved on a freezing winter day, leaving him with indelible memories. Henry still recalled those final days at Green Bay Hospital, sitting by Eleanor's bedside, gripping her frail hand. He'd begged the doctors to do something, anything, but all he got were regretful shakes of the head. When the heart monitor let out its final beep, Henry felt as if his own heart stopped too. He buried Eleanor beneath an old oak near Lake Superior, where she'd once said she wanted to hear the waves forever. Standing by her grave, the biting wind cutting through him, Henry whispered, "I'm sorry I couldn't keep you." In the days that followed, Henry lived like a shadow. The once warm house now felt eerily cold. Eleanor's armchair sat still in the living room corner, next to the book she never finished, a Robert Frost poetry collection. Henry didn't dare touch it, fearing he'd shatter the last trace of her warmth. He began avoiding mirrors, for each glance revealed an old, weary man, no longer the Henry from his days with Eleanor. The wind whistling through the pines outside sounded like a mournful tune, blending with the ticking clock, reminding him that time never paused. Michael and Clara, Henry's two children, had once been his greatest pride. Michael, now a software engineer in Minneapolis, had built a small family with 2 kids. Clara, a teacher in Madison, was busy with her career and raising her young son. Henry understood they had their own lives, but their distance hurt more than he expected. On his 63rd birthday, Michael called to apologize for not visiting, citing work. Clara forgot Christmas entirely. No call, no message. Henry wasn't angry, but each time he felt pushed further from their world. One afternoon, Henry sat on the sofa, surrounded by stifling silence. He turned on the radio, hoping music would ease the emptiness, but only sad jazz melodies played. Looking out the window at bare winter branches, he wondered if his life would remain this meaningless. The phone rang. It was Michael. "Hey, Dad, I've got something urgent tonight. Can't come over," he said hurriedly. Henry swallowed his disappointment, replying calmly, "It's fine. Take care of yourself." "I'm okay." But hanging up, he felt a deep chasm in his chest. He didn't want to burden them, but the loneliness grew, like a silent wave drowning him. Weeks later, Henry realized the house was no longer a home. The echoes of Michael and Clara's childhood laughter were gone. He recalled days by the fireplace, Eleanor telling the kids fairy tales. Now every corner stirred pain. He'd once prided himself on working at the shipyard to support his family, but in retirement, only silence remained. One night, sitting by the table with a cold plate of food, Henry heard the wind howl through the door, as if whispering he'd been left behind. He asked himself, what did I do to end up like this? Loneliness wasn't just a feeling. It had become part of him, profound and inescapable. One gloomy winter afternoon in Eagle River, Wisconsin, Henry Larson sat on the porch of his wooden house, gazing at the misty Wisconsin River. The wind sighed through the pines, mingling with the loneliness gnawing at him. The house now held only memories of Eleanor, and distant days when Michael and Clara were by his side. Just then, Walter, his 67-year-old neighbor and former truck driver, crossed the wooden fence with a slow gait. He carried a box of homemade cookies, a Midwest specialty, and sat on the wooden chair beside Henry. "It's awfully quiet around here," Walter said, his low voice drifting toward the river. Henry nodded, saying nothing, clutching a cold coffee mug. Walter sighed, handing Henry a cookie. "I'm the same. Wife's gone. Kids are off in Chicago. Hardly ever visit. Ever think about the day you're left with just yourself?" Walter's question sliced through the shell of silence Henry had built around himself. Henry looked up, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He hadn't thought deeply about it, though loneliness had become an unwilling companion. "I don't know, Walter," he replied, voice hoarse. "I thought I was ready for old age, but now I see nothing went as planned. Eleanor's gone. The kids have their own lives. Fall, I don't know what to do with this emptiness." Walter nodded, as if he understood every word. "I've been there too," he said, calm but weighty. "But you know, we can't just sit and wait. You've got to prepare, Henry. Finances need to be solid, enough for food, medicine, in your health. You've got to keep yourself from falling apart. No one's around forever, not even your kids." He paused, locking eyes with Henry. "If you're truly alone one day, what will you do?" Walter's words pierced the fog in Henry's mind, like a ray of light. He realized he'd been drifting too long, stuck in the past instead of facing the present. His finances were steady from years at the Milwaukee shipyard, but his spirit, memories of Eleanor, and the kids' distance had dimmed his will to live. "You're right," Henry whispered, gripping mug tighter. "I can't keep going like this." Walter gave a faint smile, patting Henry's shoulder. "Start small. Won't let this stillness swallow you." He stood, leaving the cookies on the table, and walked home. Henry stayed, watching the Wisconsin River flow slowly, a new feeling stirring within him. Walter's words didn't erase the loneliness, but they were a gentle breeze, brushing away some dust from his thoughts. Maybe it was time to do something, even just a small step, to reclaim his life. After his conversation with Walter, Henry Larson decided not to let loneliness continue to imprison him in his wooden house in Eagle River, Wisconsin. One winter morning, when rare sunlight pierced through the snow-covered pine branches, he put on a thick wool sweater and stepped outside. He went to a small park near Lake Eagle, where the Wisconsin River wound through bare trees. There he met Ruth, a 64-year-old widow, who had once been a nurse at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester. Ruth was sitting on a bench, reading a travel book, her eyes sparkling with a zest for life that Henry had long forgotten. "Nice day, isn't it?" Ruth said when she saw Henry standing nearby, her voice warm, like a small flame in the winter chill. Henry hesitated, but then nodded, and sat beside her. They started talking, at first just polite exchanges about the weather, but soon Ruth shared stories of her travels across Wisconsin, from the lighthouse in Door County to the wildflower fields in Baraboo. Henry was drawn in by her enthusiasm. For the first time in months, he felt a spark of light creep into his soul. In the days that followed, Henry and Ruth met more often. They had coffee at a small shop in downtown Eagle River, where Ruth liked to order a hot latte, sprinkled with cinnamon. She told Henry about her years as a nurse, how she cared for patients with a smile, despite the heaviness in her heart. Henry opened up too, sharing about Eleanor, the happy days by Lake Superior, the pain of her loss. Ruth listened, without judgment, nodding gently, as if she deeply understood what he'd been through. One day, Ruth invited Henry to cook together. They stood in her small kitchen, the golden light of the lamp casting shadows on the wooden walls. Ruth taught Henry to make Wisconsin-style potato soup, with rich cream and crispy bacon bits. "Life needs some flavor, Henry," she said with a laugh as she stirred the pot. "It's not always just about sadness." Henry laughed along, feeling truly relaxed for the first time in ages. They ate dinner at her wooden table, the clink of dishes blending with stories of days gone by, like a gentle melody chasing away the silence in his heart. Their walks along the Wisconsin River became a routine. Ruth loved picking up smooth pebbles, telling Henry how she dreamed of being an explorer as a child. Henry began sharing his own memories, like the time he and Eleanor drove to Lake Superior just to watch the sunrise. But a small corner of his heart still ached. Each time Ruth laughed, he saw Eleanor's shadow, and a flicker of guilt crossed his mind. "Am I betraying her?" he wondered. But Ruth's gentle gaze pulled him back to the present. Ruth didn't just bring joy, she rekindled Henry's will to live. She encouraged him to join gatherings at the Eagle River Community Center. The first time Henry went reluctantly, but soon he was playing chess with a group of seniors, chatting about Wisconsin winters and the ships he'd built in Milwaukee. Gradually, he felt his life was no longer just days passing aimlessly. Ruth was like a spring breeze, melting the ice that had coated his heart. But opening up wasn't always easy for Henry. Some nights, back at his wooden house, he sat by Eleanor's chair, holding her book, wondering if he had the right to find new joy. Ruth seemed to sense it. Once, as they sat by Lake Eagle, she took his hand and said, "Henry, living on doesn't mean forgetting. Eleanor would want you to be happy, like I do." Her words were like a key, unlocking a door Henry had long kept shut. The bright days with Ruth didn't erase his longing for Eleanor, but they taught him that life was still worth living, even with simple joys. Those bright days with Ruth had brought Henry Larson a fresh breeze in his wooden house in Eagle River, Wisconsin. But life, as Henry had learned from Eleanor, always had a way of turning things upside down unexpectedly. One spring afternoon, as he and Ruth sat by Lake Eagle, watching ducks glide across the water, Ruth's phone rang. It was her son, David, calling from Seattle. Her voice shifted from cheerful to somber, as she learned David was getting married, and wanted her to move in with his new family. Ruth looked at Henry, her eyes flickering with hesitation, but he knew it was something she couldn't refuse. "I don't want to go," Ruth said, her voice trembling, her hand clutching a pebble she'd just picked up. "But David's my son, and he needs me there." Henry nodded, fighting the heaviness in his chest. "I understand," he replied, though his heart tightened. "Family comes first. You should go." But as Ruth gave a faint smile and thanked him, Henry felt a part of himself slipping away, just as it had with Eleanor's departure. The day Ruth left Eagle River, Henry walked her to the bus station. She left him a letter, her handwriting shaky, but full of feeling. "Henry, you've made my days brighter. Don't let sadness hold you back. Keep living, as I hope you will." As the bus disappeared down the pine-lined road, Henry stood still, clutching the letter, feeling another piece of his life vanish. He returned to the wooden house, the fading sound of the wheels, like a wordless goodbye. Silence enveloped Henry again. The house, once alive with Ruth's laughter, now felt colder than ever. He sat on the sofa, staring at Eleanor's armchair, then thought of the potato soup dinners with Ruth. Everything seemed pointless. He turned on the radio, but the jazz only deepened his loneliness. Outside, rain began to fall, heavy drops pounding the roof, matching the ache in his heart. Henry wondered, why do the people I care about always leave me? What did I do wrong? In the days that followed, Henry sank into a mental crisis. He stopped going to the community center, stopped walking by Lake Eagle. He sat for hours in the living room, watching rain through the window, his mind flooded with unanswerable questions. He recalled Walter's words, "If you're truly alone one day, what will you do?" But now that it was real, Henry didn't know how to cope. He felt like a ship lost on Lake Michigan, with no anchor, no shore. Some nights, Henry dreamed of Eleanor and Ruth. In his dreams, they stood together, smiling at him. But when he reached out, they dissolved like mist. He'd wake up drenched in sweat, heart pounding. He held Ruth's letter, rereading it, but each word stabbed at his sense of abandonment. He blamed himself. Am I not good enough to keep anyone here? Eleanor's gone. Ruth too. What's left for me? The pain of losing Eleanor now mingled with Ruth's departure, brewing a storm in his mind. One evening, Henry sat at the table, staring at a cold plate of food. He thought of calling Michael or Clara, but held back. He didn't want them to see his weakness, didn't want to be a burden. He stepped onto the porch, letting rain soak his shirt. The rain mingled with the wind howling through the pines, like a sorrowful symphony. Henry whispered to himself, I can't keep going like this, but what do I do? Ruth's words echoed in his head, keep living. But in that moment, Henry saw only darkness, unsure how to find light again. After Ruth left, Henry Larson's wooden house, in Eagle River, Wisconsin, became an invisible prison, trapping him in loneliness and mental shadows. The rain on the roof, the wind whistling through the pines, were no longer familiar sounds but whispers of his emptiness. Ruth's letter lay on the table, but each reading only deepened his pain. He knew he couldn't keep living like this, drowning in memories of Eleanor and Ruth's departure, without seeking a way out. Walter's words rang in his mind. If you're truly alone one day, what will you do? Henry decided it was time to act. One morning, as pale sunlight filtered through the window, Henry picked up the phone, hesitated, then dialed Michael. I'm thinking about moving to a nursing home, he said, his voice calm but tinged with exhaustion. There was a long silence before Michael replied, worried, Dad, why? Aren't you fine there? A nursing home sounds so cold. Henry sighed, glancing around the house, now just an empty shell. I'm not giving up, Michael. I just want a place to live peacefully, not as lonely as now. You and Clara have your own lives. I don't want to bother you. Michael protested fiercely.
You're not a bother.
I'll visit more often, he said, but Henry knew it was a promise born of emotion. Clara, hearing from Michael, called immediately, voice choked, Dad, why not live with me in Madison? I'll figure it out. But Henry declined, unwilling to disrupt her settled life. He explained, I need a place for myself, Clara. I don't want to be a burden. Though his kids were concerned, Henry felt this was a choice he had to make himself, unable to keep relying on them to fill the void. Henry began searching. He visited a nursing home in Wausau, an hour from Eagle River. It was run down, with chilly corridors, a sharp antiseptic smell, and listless faces. He left at once, heart heavy, wondering if he'd chosen wrong. Then he heard of Pine Haven, a nursing home near Lake Superior, not far from Eagle River. He drove there one afternoon, the sun casting gold on the lake. Pine Haven was different, a small garden of wildflowers, a cozy common room with a fireplace, and distant laughter of seniors. Henry stepped inside, sensing a peace he'd forgotten. The manager, Ellen, a middle-aged woman, showed Henry around. She pointed to the garden. We plant sunflowers every summer. You can join if you'd like. Henry nodded, picturing himself tending plants instead of watching rainfall. Ellen described activities, chess, old movies, fireside chats. No one's lonely here, unless they choose to be, she said, touching Henry's heart. He stood by a sample room's window, gazing at shimmering Lake Superior, recalling days with Eleanor. Maybe this was where he could start anew. The decision wasn't easy. Back home, Henry sat by Eleanor's chair, holding her book, wondering if he was abandoning the past. But he recalled Ruth's words. Keep living. Pine Haven wasn't about forgetting Eleanor or Ruth. It was about finding himself again. He called Michael again. I've picked Pine Haven. Don't worry, I'll be fine. Michael paused, then said, if that's what you want, I respect it, but I'll visit often. Clara agreed, though her voice held worry. Weeks later, Henry packed. He took Eleanor's book, Ruth's letter, and an old family photo. Locking the wooden house for the last time, he glanced at the pines, feeling he was bidding farewell to a chapter of life. The car headed to Pine Haven, Lake Superior, coming into view, and Henry whispered, maybe this is a new beginning. He wasn't sure what lay ahead, but for the first time in ages, he felt a glimmer of hope. Keely Larson stepped into Pine Haven near Lake Superior, with a mix of hope and unease. The wooden house in Eagle River was now the past, and he brought a few keepsakes. Eleanor's book, Ruth's letter, and an old family photo. On his first day, he stood by his room's window, watching the lake glisten in the twilight, wondering if he could rediscover meaning here. Unlike the bleak Wausau nursing home, Pine Haven felt different. The wildflower garden, laughter from the common room, and the scent of baking wafting from the kitchen made him think this could be a fresh start. That evening, Henry heard piano music from the common room. He walked in and saw a woman about 70, with silver hair, playing Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. She paused, looked up, and smiled. You're new here. I'm Dorothy, from Ashland. Henry nodded, introduced himself, and sat near the piano. The music reminded him of evenings when Eleanor listened to the radio, her eyes lighting up at classical tunes. Dorothy noticed his distant look and asked, you like music? Henry replied, my wife did. I just listened. Dorothy gave a soft smile, switching to a livelier tune. She shared that she'd been a music teacher in Ashland, but gave up her passion to care for her husband, with Parkinson's for years. When he passed, I thought I'd lost my reason to live, she said, her voice dropping. But I came here, and music found me again. Henry felt a deep connection. He told her about Eleanor, how she left him empty. Dorothy listened, hands still on the keys, her gentle eyes seeming to grasp his every feeling. In the days that followed, Henry and Dorothy became friends. They often sat in Pine Haven's garden, where sunflowers bloomed under the summer sun. Dorothy loved recounting tales of her former students and the little concerts she'd organized at school. Henry shared his time at the Milwaukee shipyard, the ships he'd helped build. Once he said, I never thought I'd find someone to talk to like this again. Dorothy laughed. At this age, friends are the most unexpected gift. They joined Pine Haven's activities together. Dorothy dragged Henry to chess in the common room, though he kept losing, distracted by her stories. She taught him simple piano notes, and despite his clumsy hands, she was patient. No one's too old to learn, Henry. He started laughing more, a sound he thought he'd lost since Eleanor's death. Afternoons they sat by the fireplace, sipping hot cocoa, Dorothy's favorite, and chatting about small things. Wisconsin's harsh winters, childhood memories. But Henry wasn't always at ease. Sometimes when Dorothy played a song Eleanor loved, his heart ached. He wondered if this friendship blurred his wife's memory. One day in the garden, he confessed, sometimes I'm afraid I'm forgetting Eleanor. Dorothy rested a hand on his shoulder, voice soft. You're not forgetting her, Henry. You're just living on, as she'd surely want. Her words echoed Ruth's, and this time, they sank deeper. Dorothy brought Henry a new light. She didn't replace Eleanor or Ruth, but was a companion, showing him that old age wasn't just loss. One evening, as Dorothy played the piano and Henry listened, he looked at her and thought, maybe I can still find joy, even in small moments. Pine Haven was no longer a place to escape. It was becoming a home, thanks to Dorothy and the simple, profound friendship they shared. The days with Dorothy at Pine Haven had brought Henry Larson a sense of peace he hadn't expected. Her piano music, their fireside chats, and their clumsy chess games had become an essential part of his new life near Lake Superior. But life, as Henry was all too familiar with, always had a way of delivering unexpected blows. One summer noon, while he was watering the sunflower beds in the garden, the phone rang. It was Michael. His voice urgent and trembling. "Gee, Dad, I just got word from Pine Haven. Dorothy was in a car accident on her way to Duluth. She's at Superior Hospital. Do you want to go?" Henry felt the blood freeze in his veins. His hands shook, the watering can slipping to the ground, water splashing onto his old shoes. "What happened?" he asked, his voice breaking. Michael explained that Dorothy had driven to visit her granddaughter in Duluth, but a truck had veered out of control and hit her on the highway. "I'm on my way there," Michael said. "Stay calm, Dad. I'll pick you up." Henry hung up, his mind spinning. He remembered Dorothy's smile that morning, waving goodbye before getting in her car. "I'll bring back some waffles from Duluth for you." How could everything change so fast? Henry immediately called Pine Haven staff to arrange a ride to Superior Hospital, nearly an hour away. On the way, he sat silently, eyes fixed on the window, watching pine forests blur by in the faint sunlight. He recalled the last time Dorothy played the piano, Claire de Lune, which she'd said was for him. He blamed himself. Why didn't I tell her not to go? At the hospital, Michael and Clara were waiting outside the ER. Clara hugged him tightly, tears streaming down. "Dad, I can't believe this happened." Michael took his hand, leading him inside, voice low. "The doctors are doing their best, but it's not looking good." Henry stepped into the ER, his heart stopping as he saw Dorothy lying motionless on the bed. Neary lines and machines surrounded her, the steady beep sounding like a cruel rhythm. Her face was pale, eyes closed, devoid of the vibrant light he knew. He approached, taking her cold hand, whispering, "Dorothy, don't leave me. I need you." But she didn't respond. A nurse entered, her eyes sorrowful. "We've done all we can. She has severe head trauma. You should prepare yourself." Time seemed to halt. Henry sat by Dorothy, still clutching her hand, memories flooding back like a film reel. He remembered afternoons in Pine Haven's garden, when Dorothy showed him how to tell sunflowers from daisies. He recalled her laughter when he dropped a chess piece, and her gentle voice urging him not to forget Eleanor, but to keep living. Now it was all in the past. The doctor emerged, head bowed. "We're so sorry. She didn't make it." Henry felt the ground collapse beneath him. He knelt by the bed, tears falling onto Dorothy's hand, whispering, "You promised to bring me waffles. Why did you go?" Michael lifted him up, but Henry pushed his son's hand away, unwilling to leave Dorothy. He looked at her one last time, seeing a tear roll from her closed eye, like a silent farewell. "Dorothy, don't go," he sobbed, voice breaking. "I can't lose anyone else. You were my light here." But she was gone, leaving him in a vast emptiness. Clara hugged him, tears soaking his shoulder, but Henry felt nothing but searing pain. Leaving the hospital, Henry sat in the car, eyes blank, staring at Lake Superior, shimmering in the distance. Michael drove, Clara beside him, but no one spoke. The silence was heavier than ever. Back at Pine Haven, Henry entered the common room, where Dorothy's piano stood still. He touched the keys but didn't dare press them, afraid the sound would make the pain too real. He sank into a chair, hands cradling his head, asking, "Why does life keep taking the people I love? Eleanor, Ruth, now Dorothy. What's left for me?" That night Henry lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The sound of Lake Superior's waves echoed faintly, but it brought no comfort. He held Ruth's letter, then thought of Dorothy's smile. The pain piled up, like a massive wave drowning him. He whispered into the darkness, "I don't know how to go on." Dorothy's sudden death wasn't just the loss of a friend. It was a deep cut into the hope Henry had just regained at Pine Haven. Dorothy's sudden death left Henry Larson with a gaping wound, as if Pine Haven, where he'd once hoped to find peace, was now just a cold void beside Lake Superior. In the days after the funeral, Henry barely left his room. He sat by the window, watching the sunflowers he and Dorothy had tended wilt under the faint sun. The piano in the common room fell silent, and each time he passed it, his chest tightened. Michael and Clara called often, worried, but Henry only replied curtly, "I'm fine, don't worry." He didn't want them to see his fragility, but deep down, he didn't know how to keep going. One morning, as dawn light slipped through the curtains, Henry spotted Eleanor's book on his bedside table, Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening, by Robert Frost. He opened it, rereading the poem Eleanor loved, lines about a snowy forest and promises to keep. He remembered Dorothy saying, "You're not forgetting her, Henry. You're just living on." Her words paired with the poem felt like a reminder. He couldn't stay submerged in grief. He rose, slowly stepped into the garden, picked up the watering can. He began tending the wilted flowers. That small act didn't erase the sadness, but it gave him a fleeting purpose. Henry resolved not to sink deeper. He joined a painting class at Pine Haven, where a young volunteer taught color mixing. At first his hands trembled with the brush, but he painted a simple scene, Lake Superior at sunset, with clumsy strokes full of feeling. He hung it on his wall, a sign of a beginning. He also started a journal, jotting down thoughts about Eleanor, Ruth, and Dorothy. The early pages were tear-stained, but gradually, they became a place for his longing and hope. Michael and Clara visited more after Dorothy's death. One day, they brought his granddaughter, Lily, a 5-year-old with eyes bright like Eleanor's. Lily ran around the garden, laughing as Henry picked flowers for her. "Grandpa, this is for you," she said, handing him a wildflower. And for the first time in weeks, Henry smiled genuinely. Michael sat beside him, saying, "Dad, you're looking better." Henry nodded. "I'm trying, bit by bit." Clara hugged him, whispering, "I'm proud of you." Their presence didn't fill the void, but it reminded him he wasn't entirely alone. Henry slowly regained his rhythm at Pine Haven. He played chess with new friends, though without Dorothy to tease his losses. He joined old movie nights, chuckling at funny scenes in It's a Wonderful Life. He tended the garden more, planting daisies, Dorothy's favorite. Watering them, he thought of her, but the pain softened into a bearable, gentle sorrow. Afternoons, Henry sat by Lake Superior, listening to the waves. He recalled Ruth's words, "Life needs some flavor." He tried cooking, making the potato soup Ruth taught him, though not as good as hers. He shared it in the common room, and people praised, "You've got talent, Henry." Those simple moments made him feel he still mattered. Nights Henry wrote in his journal, under dim light. He noted what Dorothy left him, not just loss, but lessons in resilience. He wrote, "Dorothy taught me living isn't forgetting. It's carrying those you love in your heart, and moving forward." He no longer felt abandoned, like when Ruth left, or shattered like when Eleanor died. He realized he could stand alone. One day, gazing at his Lake Superior painting, Henry whispered, "Thank you, Eleanor, Ruth, Dorothy. I'm living on, as you'd want." He no longer feared loneliness. Pine Haven was home, not because it was perfect, but because he'd made it his. Healing wasn't over, but Henry knew each day brought a small step toward light within himself. After Dorothy's death, Henry Larson slowly found balance at Pine Haven near Lake Superior. Small acts like painting, journaling and gardening had steadied him, yet an emptiness lingered. One fall afternoon, as golden leaves blanketed the path, Henry sat on a garden bench, eyeing the daisies he'd planted for Dorothy. He heard slow footsteps, looked up, and saw an older man, with salt and pepper hair, approaching calmly. "I'm Arthur," he said, voice rough. "Just got here yesterday." Henry nodded, inviting Arthur to sit. They sat quietly for a while, hearing only the wind through the garden, and Lake Superior's distant waves. Arthur finally spoke. "My wife passed last year. Kids are far off. No one visits anymore." Henry glanced at him, feeling a familiar empathy. The loneliness he'd known when Eleanor, Ruth, and Dorothy left. "Me too," Henry replied. "But here, sometimes you find something new." They began walking together around Pine Haven. Arthur was quiet, but his presence brought Henry comfort. They didn't need many words, just walk side by side, picking up fallen leaves, or sitting by the lake at sunset. Henry told Arthur about Dorothy, her piano, and Arthur nodded. I used to like music, but now I just want peace. Their silence wasn't awkward, but a subtle bond, linking two souls hurt by loss. Henry also grew closer to Pine Haven's community. He joined activities, bingo nights, baking cookies for Halloween. Once, he brought his potato soup and folks gathered, praising, Henry, you should open a diner. He laughed, no longer feeling like an outsider. Other residents shared their stories. George about his carpentry days, Helen about fishing trips on Lake Michigan. Henry saw everyone here carried a past, connected by simple things. Arthur and the community became Henry's new anchors. One day by the fireplace, Arthur said, I didn't think I'd find anyone to talk to at this age. Henry nodded, me neither, but sometimes just having someone there saying nothing is enough. He recalled Dorothy's words about living on, now seeing it wasn't just walking alone, but finding new ties in unexpected moments. Pine Haven wasn't just a refuge anymore. It was a community where Henry belonged. He looked at Arthur, the familiar faces in the common room, and thought, I'm not as alone as before. Though Eleanor, Ruth, and Dorothy were gone, he could still find light in those around him. Henry smiled faintly, warmth creeping into his heart. Not a replacement, but a continuation of his healing journey. Henry didn't deny that longing sometimes crept in. Some nights, he dreamed of Eleanor smiling by Lake Superior, or heard Dorothy's piano echo. But now, those memories weren't pain. They were solace. He'd learned independence, painting, journaling, gardening, and found joy in the simple. Michael and Clara still visited, bringing Lily, and her laughter revived a piece of Eleanor. But he knew, family or friends aside, he had to walk alone in the end. He gazing at the lake shimmering under sunset. Henry felt a fresh freedom. He was no longer caged by the past, or fear of loss. He wrote his journal's final line, old age isn't an end, but a new chapter. I'm free, because I've learned to live with myself. He closed the book, stood, and joined Arthur and friends in the common room for chess. Laughter mingled with the wind outside, and Henry smiled, a serene smile. Henry Larson's story, at Eagle River and Pine Haven, mirrors a reality many elderly Americans face: loneliness in a modern society, where kids like Michael and Clara in Minneapolis and Madison are busy with work and separate lives. In today's U.S., with fast-paced living and scattered families, seniors often feel left behind, like Henry alone in his wooden house, hearing wind through the pines. Losing Eleanor, Ruth, and Dorothy highlights a common truth. Old age often brings the loss of loved ones, forcing people to face an emotional void. Yet Henry's journey, from crisis when Ruth left to peace at Pine Haven, offers a valuable lesson. Americans today can adopt Henry's self-reliance, like when he painted, journaled, or tended the daisy garden. In a U.S. culture prizing individualism, joining local communities, like Henry with Arthur and Pine Haven residents, is a practical way to beat loneliness. Try community centers, free library classes, or volunteering, as Henry did with his potato soup. His lesson isn't forgetting the past, but carrying memories, like Eleanor's book, or Dorothy's words, to live on. In modern America, where work and tech can isolate us, take time to build small connections. They'll guide you to freedom and peace, as Henry found by Lake Superior. Thank you for joining me through this story. I hope we'll meet again to find more peace and hope in the days ahead.